Hello, and welcome back to Sci-fi Stories. I want to sincerely thank you for being here with us today. Unfortunately, YouTube has recently demonetized our channel, leaving us without the budget to keep operating. If you enjoy today's story, please consider supporting us with just $1 so we can pay our hardworking staff to cover their living expenses and continue creating these adventures for you. You can support us by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the donation link in the video description or comments. The Tartarus mining station smelled of ozone, dried machine oil, and rust. It was not a place for the living, and it certainly offered no dignity to the dead. Carlos Blue stood in the center of an abandoned waste disposal bay, a gruff mechanic burying a brother branded a traitor. Then, the impossible tore through the vacuum of space, carrying a pulsing crown that would change the universe forever. There were no grand vaulted halls for this farewell, nor were there hundreds of mourners dressed in solemn black. There was only the suffocating, claustrophobic belly of the industrial sector, hidden far beneath the administrative decks. A single, cold steel coffin rested on a pair of hydraulic lifters. Around it, the air was thick and heavy, illuminated only by the sickly, flickering glow of broken neon utility lights. Carlos stood with his grease-stained hands shoved deep into his pockets, his jaw locked tight in suppressed rage. A handful of soot-covered miners had snuck away from their shifts to pay their respects, hovering in the shadows like ghosts. They risked their livelihoods just by being there. The ruling Apex Corporation had declared his brother a traitor, broadcasting to all colonies that the pilot had died in a tragic, self-inflicted accident. Everyone in this damp, rusted room knew it was a corporate lie. Carlos pulled his hands from his pockets and rested them on the freezing steel lid of the coffin. He looked around at the tired, hollow faces of the miners. They took his life, and then they tried to take his honor, Carlos said, his voice raspy and echoing off the scrap metal walls. My brother did not betray us. He saw something out there in the dark, something Apex wanted buried. We are standing here today not just to mourn, but to remember that the truth does not die just because a corporation signs a piece of paper. He paused, swallowing the bitter lump in his throat. He prepared to speak his brother's name, but the words never left his lips. Without a single warning siren, the heavy, artificial hum of the station gravity generators died. It did not happen across the entire facility, but in a perfect, localized sphere, exactly 100 meters in radius. Dust motes, loose screws, and droplets of condensation instantly lifted from the grated floor, floating weightless in the dead air. The miners gasped, grabbing onto exposed pipes to anchor themselves. Carlos gripped the edges of the heavy steel coffin as his boots left the floor. The space in the center of the room began to warp and distort, rippling wildly like a violent heat mirage on a desert highway. Then, the void stepped inside. It did not breach the station hull. It simply phased through the solid, reinforced durasteel walls, as if the physical world was nothing but a suggestion. It was not a normal biological creature. It was a dragon, the size of a small timber wolf, forged entirely out of cosmic forces. Its scales were swirling patches of inky dark matter, outlined by the blinding, sharp glow of captured starlight. Nebulas seemed to breathe within its chest with every movement. In its jaws, the celestial beast gently held a tiny crown. The artifact was crafted from a sleek, liquid-like metal that existed nowhere on the human periodic table. The crown was alive. It pulsed with a rhythmic, blinding white light, beating steadily like a miniature, mechanical heart. The creature ignored the terrified gasps of the miners. It ignored the floating debris and the flickering neon lights. It locked its glowing, ancient eyes purely on Carlos. Walking through the zero-gravity environment as though treading on invisible, solid ground, the beast approached the coffin. It stopped right in front of the mechanic. With a gentle tilt of its head, it opened its jaws and let the tiny, pulsing crown drift down until it softly clinked against the floating metal floor. Then, the creature bowed, resting its starlit head against Carlos's heavy work boot. Carlos could not breathe. His heart hammered against his ribs. Slowly, driven by an instinct he did not know he possessed. He reached down. His calloused, grease-stained fingers brushed against the top of the creature's head. The second human skin made contact with the cosmic entity. The universe snapped. A colossal electromagnetic pulse erupted from the point of contact. A wave of silent, blinding blue force blasted outward, shattering every light bulb, monitor, and relay in the sector. In a fraction of a second, the EMP surged through the miles of wiring, completely knocking out the communication grid of the entire Tartarus station, plunged into absolute, ringing darkness. Carlos did not know that this massive energy spike had just triggered a galaxy-wide alarm, instantly waking the lethal purge force of the Apex Corporation. Emergency red strobes slashed through the crushing darkness of the waste bay. The main reinforced bulkhead doors did not just open. They were blown violently off their hinges by a high-yield concussive charge. The heavy metal slammed into the opposite wall with a deafening crash. Heavy combat boots pounded against the grated floor in perfect, terrifying synchronization. It was the Apex Purge Force. They were clad in sleek, matte black tactical exosuits, their faces hidden behind glowing red visors. Their corporate mandate was absolute and brutal: secure the anomaly and leave exactly 0 witnesses alive. Lethal, superheated plasma rounds screamed through the air, instantly vaporizing the remaining oxygen in the room. The miners, unarmed and entirely disoriented by the sudden chaos, did not stand a chance. Carlos watched in sheer, paralyzed horror as the brave men who had risked their jobs to honor his brother fell one by one to the scorched floor. "Move!" Carlos shouted, though the lingering vacuum swallowed the sound from his lungs. Adrenaline flooded his veins. He snatched the pulsing, liquid metal crown from the deck and scooped up the cosmic beast. It felt terrifyingly weightless in his arms, like cradling a condensed, miniature storm of cold fire. In the split second of chaos, a single name flashed into his mind for the creature: Nova. Carlos bolted toward the heavy maintenance access hatch at the back of the bay. He slammed his fist into the manual override panel, shattering the plastic casing, and hurled himself and Nova into the vertical drop shaft. They plummeted down into the dark, sliding down the maintenance ladders toward the forbidden zone of the station, the Tartarus nuclear reactor core. The purge force swarmed the shaft above them almost instantly. Brilliant red targeting lasers sliced down into the gloom, tracking Carlos as he descended. A heavily armored sniper at the top of the shaft locked onto his target and fired. A high-velocity kinetic armor-piercing round shrieked down the chute, aimed perfectly at the center of Carlos's spine. Death was a fraction of a second away. Nova shifted in his arms. The tiny dragon did not roar or panic. It simply blinked its ancient, starlit eyes. Suddenly, the very fabric of space warped with a sickening crunch. The kinetic bullet froze exactly 2 inches from the back of Carlos's neck. It was trapped inside a localized time vacuum. The deadly projectile hung there in midair, spinning furiously in suspended animation, generating a localized ring of distorted heat, before losing all its momentum and dropping harmlessly into the endless abyss below. The soldiers above switched to automatic plasma fire. Beams of searing red energy rained down, but as they neared Carlos and the creature, the impossible happened again. The lasers bent. The deadly light refracted around them, curving like rushing water flowing past a smooth riverstone, scorching the steel walls instead of human flesh. Nova was effortlessly folding the laws of physics to shield them from certain death. Carlos hit the reactor deck hard, rolling across the grated floor to absorb the impact. He scrambled to his feet and sprinted deep into the labyrinth of towering cooling silos and thick, irradiated coolant piping. The warning alarms of the lower deck wailed, and the radiation counters on the concrete walls clicked frantically. The maze of heavy machinery offered perfect cover. For the moment, they had lost their pursuers. They were temporarily safe. Carlos collapsed heavily behind a massive, humming coolant turbine, violently gasping for air. His chest heaved as he slid down the curved metal wall to the floor. Nova hopped gracefully out of his arms, tilting its head and looking up at him with galaxies swirling in its eyes. Suddenly, the tiny crown in Carlos's hand grew burning hot. He dropped it onto the floor with a gasp. With a sharp, piercing electronic hum, the sleek metal of the artifact reshaped itself. A brilliant beam of pale blue light shot upward from the crown, projecting a flickering, high-definition hologram into the dusty, irradiated air. Carlos felt his heart stop. His breath completely hitched in his throat. Standing right there in the glowing projection, looking as real as the day he left, was his older brother. His brother wore a heavily torn and blood-stained pilot suit. He looked exhausted, terrified, but fiercely determined. His voice crackled through the audio static of the projection. "Carlos, if you are seeing this message, it means I am already dead. They are hunting me down right now, but you need to know the absolute truth. I never betrayed our people. I never betrayed anyone." The hologram shifted violently, replacing the image of his brother with a massive, awe-inspiring cosmic anomaly. It was a nebula of breathtaking scale and beauty, swirling with brilliant gold and deep violet stardust. But wrapped tightly around the glowing core of the nebula was a monstrous, sprawling apex corporation harvesting rig, driving massive energy siphons directly into the cosmic clouds. "It is a star nursery," his brother's voice continued, thick with sorrow and anger. "It is the sacred birthplace of the cosmic dragons. Apex found it out here in the dark. They are not mining minerals, Carlos. They are ruthlessly draining the pure life force of newborn stars and bleeding the dragons dry to build a galactic superweapon. I tried to stop them. I sabotaged their main siphon and managed to free one of the captive hatchlings before they locked the sector down." Carlos slowly turned his head to stare at Nova. The tiny dragon sat quietly, nudging Carlos's knee with its cold, starlit snout. "This crown is not some piece of royal jewelry," the hologram crackled, fading slightly as the recording reached its end. "It is a biological memory module. It holds the exact, encrypted coordinates of the star nursery. I gave it to the hatchling. I told it to run, to escape through the warp gates, and to find my bloodline. These dragons are connected to the fundamental fabric of the cosmos. Carlos, they can track the genetic frequency of a human soul." The sheer magnitude of the truth crashed down on the gruff mechanic, heavy and undeniable. The creature beside him had navigated through supermassive black holes, dodged corporate armadas, and crossed thousands of light-years of dead, freezing space. It was guided only by the DNA resonance of the lone pilot who had sacrificed everything to save it, all just to find Carlos. The corporation had murdered his brother to bury a secret, but in doing so, they had inadvertently handed Carlos the exact key to their total destruction. The labyrinth of the Tartarus nuclear reactor core was a suffocating graveyard of decaying industrial machinery. Acrid, heavy yellow vapor hissed from heavily corroded cooling pipes, filling the dead air with an invisible, creeping poison. Carlos dragged his heavy work boots across the grated floor, every single step feeling as though he were wading through an ocean of thick, sinking mud. The analog Geiger counters embedded along the crumbling concrete walls clicked furiously, creating a relentless death march that echoed through the gloom. The lethal radiation was already working its devastating path deep into his bloodstream. His peripheral vision began to blur, bleeding rapidly into dark, shifting patches of gray. His lungs burned like they were filled with crushed glass with every shallow breath, and a sharp, metallic taste coated his tongue. He stumbled, his knees slamming brutally into the unforgiving steel deck. He could not drag himself a single inch further. The exhausted mechanic leaned heavily against a vibrating turbine housing, closing his eyes as he waited for the inevitable end. Nova watched him closely. The tiny cosmic beast understood the tragic frailty of mortal flesh. It stepped forward, its mesmerizing starlit eyes brimming with ancient sorrow, raising one sharply curved, shadow-forged claw. The dragon deliberately slashed a deep line across its own chest. No biological blood spilled from the wound. Instead, a brilliant, blinding fissure of pure cosmic energy tore open, glowing fiercely like the molten heart of a newborn sun. The creature nudged Carlos with its cold snout, gently but urgently pushing his trembling, grease-stained hand directly into the radiant, pulsing wound. The very moment his human skin touched the liquid starlight, the corroded, rusted reality of the reactor room vanished entirely. Carlos was violently thrown into an endless ocean of pure consciousness. There were no spoken words, no physical language to decipher, only the overwhelming, crushing weight of infinite existence. He felt the violent, beautiful birth cries of a billion nebulas igniting in the absolute dark. He felt the terrifying, heavy silence of collapsing galaxies, folding inward into supermassive black holes. But rising above all the grand cosmic symphonies, he felt a singular, piercing emotion stabbing at his soul. It was an echoing, hollow ache of total, utter isolation. He physically felt the profound grief of a magnificent species hunted to the very brink of extinction, stripped of their starlight, their ancestral homes turned into corporate slaughterhouses. Carlos openly wept. He did not cry for his own impending death or for his murdered brother, but for the profound, suffocating loneliness of the majestic creature choosing to tether its eternal soul to his own fragile life. It was a flawless, wordless understanding. They were two desperate orphans of a completely broken universe, binding their deep pain together just to survive another breath. This psychological bond was a powerful, two-way conduit. As Nova poured its cosmic resilience directly into Carlos, rapidly flushing the deadly radiation out of his dying cells, the creature simultaneously drew heavily upon the raging, desperate fire of the human spirit. The dragon fed voraciously on the sheer, stubborn will of a man who absolutely refused to break. Right before Carlos's wide, astonished eyes, the tiny beast began to morph. The atmospheric pressure in the room dropped so drastically that Carlos's ears popped. Wild tendrils of dark matter violently expanded, weaving rapidly over each other like shifting metallic muscles. The creature grew at a terrifying rate, its physical form stretching and twisting until it towered massively over him. In a matter of mere seconds, it evolved from a helpless, wolf-sized hatchling into a terrifying, serpentine entity spanning fully 10 meters long. Razor-sharp scales, glinting like highly polished titanium, cascaded down its massive spine. Its physical presence became so incredibly dense that the thick steel floor panels began to groan and buckle under its immense weight. However, their temporary sanctuary was violently shattered by a synchronized, mechanical shriek echoing down from the massive ventilation shafts high above. The Apex Purge Force had not bothered to send human soldiers down into the highly irradiated maze. Instead, they had dropped their apex predators. A swarm of hound drones hit the metal floor with heavy, ringing thuds. They were grotesque, quadrupedal killing machines, completely lacking heads or visual optical sensors. They were equipped entirely with glowing blue synaptic arrays designed specifically to hunt the exact frequency of human brainwaves. Their razor-edged titanium mandibles clacked rapidly, tasting the electromagnetic signatures in the heavy air. The pack immediately fanned out, their hydraulic limbs propelling them forward with terrifying, jerky, and relentless speed. Carlos stood up tall. The sickening weakness of the radiation was entirely gone, replaced by a surging, thrumming current of liquid starlight racing through his veins. He looked calmly at the oncoming horde of mechanical nightmares. And then, he looked up at the towering, metallic dragon standing beside him. There was nowhere left to run, nowhere left to hide. But the mechanic did not issue a single verbal command. He did not treat Nova like a simple weapon to be pointed and fired at an enemy. Instead, through the glowing telepathic bond firmly rooted in his mind, Carlos shared a uniquely human gift. He flooded the dragon's consciousness with raw, unyielding defiance. He showed it the desperate, beautiful courage of cornered prey, choosing to bare its teeth and laugh at the abyss. He showed it the raging fire of a frail species that always fought the absolute hardest when the odds of survival were exactly zero. Nova received the blazing emotion. The massive dragon reared back on its powerful hind legs, spreading a majestic set of wings woven entirely from violently distorted gravity fields. It opened its towering, jagged jaws, but no sound came out. It was a roar of pure, kinetic silence. A catastrophic gravity shockwave detonated directly from its throat. The sheer, unfathomable force of the invisible ripple fractured the surrounding air, hitting the advancing pack of hound drones with the concentrated, crushing pressure of a collapsing star. In a microscopic fraction of a single heartbeat, the terrifying mechanical hunters were flattened, instantly and violently crushed into unrecognizable, sparking disks of completely useless scrap metal pressed flat against the reactor floor. The lethal threat was obliterated, leaving only the humming silence of the surviving turbines and the steady, synchronized beating hearts of the human and his dragon. The echoes of the crushed mechanical drones had barely settled when reality itself violently shattered. A grid of blinding violet light dropped from the shadows high above the reactor. It was a quantum snare, an advanced spatial trap reserved strictly for high-value corporate assets. There was no physical movement, only a sickening, instantaneous tear through the very fabric of the station. The suffocating, irradiated air of the lower depths was instantly ripped away, replaced by the sterile, chillingly perfect climate of the upper stratum. Here, at the absolute peak of the Tartarus station, the air smelled of synthetic pine and filtered ozone. Massive reinforced glass windows lined the walls, offering a cold, terrifying view of the endless, spinning cosmos outside. Carlos was slammed brutally onto a floor carved from flawless, highly polished obsidian. Two towering guards clad in heavy kinetic combat armor immediately forced him to his knees, pressing the cold, humming barrels of their plasma rifles directly against the back of his skull. A few meters away, Nova was trapped. The towering metallic dragon thrashed furiously inside a cylindrical anti-gravity containment field. Its razor-sharp, titanium-like scales sparked uselessly against the impenetrable, humming walls of hard light. Looming in the dimly lit periphery were the silent, observing members of the Apex Board of Directors, looking down from their elevated platforms like modern-day gods ruling over a dying universe. But stepping out from the shadows was the chief executive officer himself. He was dressed in an immaculate dark suit that seemed to absorb the light around it, a jarring, deliberate contrast to the grease, sweat, and blood covering the defiant mechanic kneeling before him. The CEO walked forward with slow, highly calculated steps. He did not look at Nova. He looked purely at Carlos. Reaching down, he effortlessly snatched the pulsing, liquid metal crown right out of Carlos's trembling fingers. "You truly believe you are a savior, mechanic?" the CEO asked, his voice a smooth, venomous whisper that carried flawlessly across the vast, silent room. "You think this universe operates on childish fairy tales of destiny and cosmic justice for 200 years. Apex has conquered every living thing it has touched because we understand the fundamental truth of existence." The CEO raised his free hand and gripped the edge of his own face. With a sickening, synthetic tearing sound, he peeled back a flawless layer of biological masking skin. Carlos gasped. The entire left hemisphere of the CEO's skull was a grotesque, jagged landscape of glowing purple crystals. The hardened, alien minerals dug deep into his eye socket and jawline, pulsing with a sick, parasitic light. 50 years ago, I found one of these magnificent beasts, the CEO hissed, his crystalline jaw clicking heavily as he spoke. I tried to merge my consciousness with it. I tried to harness the absolute, infinite power of the cosmos. But the creature judged me. It violently rejected my ambition. It cursed me with this crystalline rot and drove me to the very edge of madness. From that day on, I swore I would break their entire species. They are not divine entities. They are fuel. They are simply the next grand resource for the apex predator of the galaxy to consume and discard. The CEO casually tapped a heavy silver ring on his index finger. A brutal, agonizing wave of electromagnetic force erupted directly from the obsidian floor beneath Carlos. The mechanic screamed as his muscles violently seized. It felt as though 10,000 heated needles were being driven directly into his nervous system, frying his nerve endings. "Look at yourself," the CEO mocked, watching Carlos writhe in sheer agony against the floor. "The human body is entirely too small, too incredibly fragile to contain the boundless energy of the stars. You are nothing but a temporary, pathetic vessel. You think you have formed a genuine bond? It is nothing but a chemical illusion, born of pure, biological desperation. In the natural order, the strong always devour the weak, and predators always abandon a dying host. The very second I place this crown upon my head, the beast will recognize true, unyielding dominance. It will shatter your pathetic bond, submit entirely to my superior will, and surrender the exact coordinates to the star nursery." The electromagnetic torture ceased for a brief, agonizing second. Carlos slumped forward, coughing up a heavy spray of crimson blood onto the pristine, polished floor. His body was entirely broken, running on the absolute final fumes of his adrenaline. But as he slowly lifted his head to look directly at the corporate tyrant, Carlos did not beg. He did not ask for a single ounce of mercy. Instead, a bloody, profoundly defiant smile stretched across his battered face. He turned his gaze toward the containment cell. He locked eyes with the thrashing cosmic dragon. Carlos did not use human words. Through their deep, glowing telepathic bond, he sent Nova a single, blinding realization. He showed the creature the infinite, terrifying beauty of a vast, open sky. He showed it that a gilded cage was infinitely worse than a violent, bloody death. He showed it that true, absolute freedom was worth burning the entire universe to the ground. Nova understood instantly. The massive dragon stopped thrashing. It sat perfectly still in the anti-gravity field, its starlit eyes narrowing into slits of pure, lethal focus. Triumphant and utterly arrogant. The CEO raised the biological memory module and pressed the pulsing crown firmly onto his own head. He closed his eyes, expecting the glorious rush of cosmic submission. Instead, the artifact unleashed a piercing, deafening shriek that shattered the reinforced windows. Nova fiercely rejected the connection, instantly weaponizing the telepathic bridge. The dragon violently reversed the flow of energy, creating a catastrophic cosmic feedback loop. The pure, unfiltered power of a collapsing star surged violently back through the crown and directly into the corporate tyrant. The CEO's eyes snapped open in absolute, unadulterated terror. He opened his mouth to scream, but the sound was instantly swallowed by a blinding flash of stellar fire. The catastrophic energy overload blasted down his shoulder and violently incinerated his entire right arm. Flesh, bone, and tailored fabric were instantly reduced to a shower of black, smoking ash in a fraction of a second, leaving the crippled tyrant collapsing to his knees in agonizing, world-shattering disbelief. The catastrophic energy feedback that incinerated the chief executive officer's arm sent a massive, violent power surge through the entire upper stratum. The humming anti-gravity containment field trapping Nova violently flickered and died. That single microsecond of weakness was all the cosmic dragon needed. With a kinetic roar that shook the very foundations of the obsidian floor, Nova shattered the hard light prison into a million fading sparks. The towering beast lunged across the room, wrapping its massive titanium-scaled body entirely around Carlos. An emergency decompression alarm shrieked as the dragon launched itself forcefully upward, smashing headfirst through the heavily reinforced durasteel ceiling of the boardroom. The vacuum of space instantly sucked the remaining air from the room. Carlos's standard-issue mechanic suit reacted on pure instinct, instantly deploying his emergency environmental helmet and sealing shut just as they breached the station's outer hull. Together, the man and the dragon burst out of the suffocating, corporate-controlled nightmare and plunged into the breathtaking, endless dark of the open cosmos. But the Apex Corporation did not intend to let them go. The massive hangar bay doors of the Tartarus station groaned open, and a terrifying armada deployed into the void. Tens of thousands of sleek, heavily armed corporate starfighters swarmed out like a mechanical plague, instantly locking their targeting lasers onto the fleeing anomaly. What followed was not a conventional military engagement, but a terrifyingly beautiful, surreal symphony of cosmic violence. Nova did not attempt to fly by beating its majestic wings against the dead vacuum of space. Instead, the entity effortlessly manipulated the fundamental laws of astrophysics. It surfed along the invisible, bending folds of space and time, moving with an impossible, liquid grace. When a squadron of heavily armored dreadnoughts fired a barrage of plasma torpedoes, Nova simply twisted. With a single, elegant thrash of its massive tail, the dragon generated localized, devastating magnetic storms. The catastrophic gravitational shear tore the multi-ton corporate warships apart at the molecular level, rendering them into harmless clouds of floating dust in a matter of seconds. Riding upon the back of the magnificent beast, safely shielded within a localized atmospheric bubble generated by Nova's sheer cosmic presence, Carlos knew they could not fight an infinite army. The mechanic looked down at the pulsing, liquid metal crown, still tightly gripped in his gloved hand. He realized what he had to do. With frantic, trembling fingers, Carlos slammed the biological memory module directly into the universal communication port on the chest plate of his spacesuit. Powered by the boundless, roaring energy of the dragon beneath him, Carlos shattered every single corporate firewall in the sector. He hijacked the Central Apex Broadcasting Network, turning their own massive communication arrays against them. He transmitted his brother's final, desperate hologram. He broadcast the horrifying, undeniable visual evidence of the massive harvesting rigs, draining the pure life force of the star nursery. He sent the absolute truth, completely unencrypted and raw, to every single human colony, every isolated mining outpost, and every bustling trade hub across the entire galaxy. For one long, agonizing minute, the universe stood completely still. Then, the absolute fury of 100 billion oppressed souls ignited. The reaction was not just a protest. It was a spontaneous, explosive, galaxy-wide mutiny. Across all surrounding sectors, the working class threw down their tools. Communication channels flooded with the raging voices of those who had suffered for centuries under the corporate boot. Suddenly, the pitch-black space surrounding the Tartarus station began to violently tear open. Hundreds, then thousands of warp signatures blazed to life in the dark. A colossal, makeshift armada dropped out of hyperspace. They were not warships. They were massive, battered ore-hauling freighters, rusted industrial transport vessels, and tiny, patched-together civilian scavengers. The impoverished miners and desperate colonists had come, driven by pure, unadulterated righteous anger. This civilian fleet thrust their engines into maximum overdrive. They did not fire a single weapon. Instead, they threw their massive, heavily armored hulls directly into the line of fire, forming an impenetrable, suicidal wall of solid iron and stubborn human solidarity between the lethal Apex Armada and the fleeing dragon. Back inside the shattered, freezing ruins of the boardroom, the chief executive officer watched his tyrannical empire collapse into complete and utter ruin. Clutching the charred, smoking stump of his right arm, the tyrant's mind finally fractured into pure, unrecoverable madness. If he could not conquer the universe, he would ensure no one else would inherit it. Stumbling to the master control console, the CEO smashed his remaining hand down onto the biometric override sequence. He bypassed every safety protocol and activated the ultimate corporate deterrent, the Nemesis Spear. Deep within the core of the Tartarus station, a massive, horrific weapon began to unfold. It was not a conventional missile. It was a planetary annihilation superweapon, a massive particle accelerator designed to fire a concentrated beam of pure, unstable dark energy. The targeting computer instantly locked onto the exact coordinates of the star nursery that had just been broadcast across the galaxy. An automated voice echoed across all emergency frequencies, chilling the blood of every pilot in the makeshift rebel fleet. The firing sequence had been locked. The countdown clock had been initiated. There were exactly 3 minutes remaining until the Nemesis Spear fired its world-ending payload. Carlos watched in absolute horror as the massive, swirling vortex of dark energy began to violently gather at the tip of the station. His heart sank with a crushing realization. The Nemesis Spear was entirely composed of intangible, destructive energy fields. It possessed no physical structure for the rebel fleet to ram, and no kinetic armor for Nova to shatter. It was an unstoppable, world-ending execution order, and no amount of physical force in the entire universe could possibly prevent it from erasing the majestic cosmic dragons from existence. The colossal vortex of dark energy swirling at the tip of the Nemesis Spear defied all natural comprehension. It was a localized black hole, a tearing wound in the fabric of the universe that eagerly swallowed the surrounding starlight, floating within the protective atmospheric bubble generated by the magnificent dragon. Carlos stared into the face of absolute annihilation. The makeshift armada of rusted freighters and civilian scavengers stood bravely between the corporate superweapon and the open cosmos. But their sacrifice would be entirely in vain. The mechanic knew with crushing certainty that no amount of reinforced iron plating, and not even the unfathomable kinetic strength of the cosmic beast beneath him, could physically stop a beam of pure, unstable dark energy. Physicality itself was obsolete in the face of this absolute erasure. He looked down at his gloved hand. The biological memory module rested in his palm, pulsing with a frantic, blinding white rhythm. For a fleeting moment, Carlos understood the profound ignorance of the corporate tyrant. The chief executive officer had believed this artifact was a leash, a tool of dominance designed to subjugate the divine to the will of the mortal. It was not a tool of control. It was a singularity. The artifact was a cosmic bridge, a sacred conduit that demanded the ultimate price. It required the complete and total sacrifice of the ego, a willing surrender of the finite human shell to merge two fractured souls into a singular, elevated state of existence. There was no fear in his heart. The suffocating weight of his past, the grief for his murdered brother, and the desperate struggle for survival all melted away into a profound, crystalline peace. In the terrifying silence of the void, Carlos smiled. He reached up with both hands and firmly grasped the locking mechanism of his environmental collar. With a sharp twist, He disengaged the vital seals. He lifted the heavy helmet off his shoulders and let it drift away into the freezing vacuum of space. He did not gasp for air. He did not freeze. Time seemed to stop entirely. Carlos raised the pulsing, liquid metal crown and placed it gently upon his own head. He willingly abandoned his mortal flesh, surrendering his fragile human existence to the boundless depths of the cosmos. A silent explosion of pure, blinding white light instantly swallowed the entire sector. There was no pain, no violent tearing of flesh and bone. Carlos simply expanded. He felt his physical body dissolve into billions of glowing, golden particles, drifting upward like embers from a dying fire. His consciousness did not fade into the dark. Instead, it rushed outward, flooding into the blinding energy core of the dragon. He felt the ancient, sweeping memories of the cosmic beast intertwine flawlessly with his own human soul. The agonizing boundary between man and creature vanished completely. They were no longer Carlos the mechanic, nor were they Nova, the hunted hatchling. They ignited together, transcending the biological limitations of the universe to become a colossal, living star. The new entity was a breathtaking marvel of unimaginable scale. It spanned kilometers across the dark void, an ethereal titan woven from shifting auroras, golden nebulas, and the solid, humming fabric of space-time itself. It radiated a profound, infinite warmth that gently pushed against the cold metal hulls of the terrified rebel fleet. From the shattered core of the Tartarus station, the Nemesis spear finally fired. A massive, silent pillar of absolute darkness shot through the void, aimed directly at the heart of the galaxy. The living star did not move to physically block the catastrophic beam. It did not counter with violence. Instead, the colossal entity simply glided directly into the path of the world-ending energy. Using its newly ascended consciousness, the being reached into the fundamental strings of reality. It did not destroy. It rewrote the physical laws of the surrounding space. As the lethal dark energy struck the radiant chest of the living star, the beam was instantly stripped of its destructive molecular structure. The apocalyptic weapon unraveled, violently transmuting from a force of total annihilation into a breathtaking, sweeping storm of harmless, iridescent aurora borealis. A magnificent rain of shimmering emerald and violet light washed over the battlefield. The gentle, cascading energy harmlessly blanketed the remaining corporate armada. In a matter of seconds, the radiant rain peacefully drained every single plasma reactor and weapon system within the Apex fleet, reducing their tyrannical warships to silent, powerless metal husks drifting quietly in the void. Total, absolute disarmament was achieved without a single drop of blood being spilled. Decades passed. The invincible Apex Corporation, stripped of its weaponry and exposed to the fury of a united galaxy, crumbled into historical dust. Humanity stepped out of the shadow of greed and entered a golden era of peaceful, boundless exploration. The rusted, floating ruins of the Tartarus station were left untouched, serving as a silent monument to the day the universe changed forever. And out there, in the vibrant, thriving depths of the open cosmos, the miners who traveled the ancient trade routes would sometimes pause and look out their viewport windows, drifting gracefully past the newly born stars. They would often see a colossal, starlight-woven dragon gliding through the majestic nebulas. Whenever a weary traveler raised a hand to the glass and whispered a soft hello, they would immediately feel it. A gentle, profoundly human warmth would echo quietly in their minds, a calm and familiar reassurance that they were never alone. The absolute impossible had not just happened. It had become the beautiful, enduring genesis of an entirely new universe. Thank you so much for listening to today's adventure. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please let me know your city or country in the comments below. If you found today's adventure captivating and want to help us keep this channel alive, please consider supporting us with just $1. You can scan the QR code right here on the screen, or click the donation link in the video description or pinned comment. Your incredible generosity pays the hard-working staff behind these videos, helps them feed their families, and ensures we can continue creating these epic journeys for you. Thank you for being the best part of this channel, and I will see you in the next story.